Well, I'm excited to be here tonight and to be able to share with you. I was thinking about leading a song tonight, but then I decided I'd really like the audience to stay with us, so I'm going to skip that. Let's have an opening word of prayer. Holy and righteous Father in heaven, very excited to be able to be here tonight, very thankful for the blessings that we have. Thank you for modern technology. It makes it possible for us to stay connected, even though not physically present. We're really grateful for that. We're so thankful for your scripture, the powerful, the solid, the secure word that continues to give us help, continues to give us hope. So bless our evening, Father, in Jesus' name, amen. I wanted to start it out by reading out of Psalm 102 tonight. Very awesome psalm with some great encouragement. It gives us a picture here of what I'd like to share tonight. Psalm 102 in verse 12 says, "But you, O Lord, abide forever, and your name to all generations. You will arise and have compassion on Zion, for it is time to be gracious to her, for the appointed time has come. Surely your servants find pleasure in her stones and feel pity in her dust. So the nations will fear the name of the Lord, and all the kings of the earth your glory. For the Lord has built up Zion, he has appeared in his glory. He has regarded the prayer of the destitute and has not despised their prayer. This will be written for a generation to come, a people yet to be created, that a people yet to be created may praise you. He looked down from his holy height. From heaven the Lord gazed upon the earth to hear the groaning of the prisoner, to set free those who are doomed to death, that men may tell of the name of the Lord in Zion and his praise in Jerusalem, when the peoples are gathered together and the kingdoms to serve the Lord. He has weakened my strength in the way. He has shortened my days. I say, O my God, do not take me away in the midst of my days. Your years are throughout all generations. Of old you founded the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Even they will perish, but you will endure. All of them will wear out like a garment. Like clothing, you will change them, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not come to an end. The children of your servants will continue, and their descendants will be established before you." Here he speaks of a generation yet to come, a people yet to come. So Israel, as a nation, was not God's eternal people, but the people under the terms of the new covenant are those to whom Psalm 102 is looking for, and here it is tonight. So as we come together to get a little information, a little bit of encouragement, I just had something here that I wanted to take a moment and read. I thought I better read it rather than try to ad-lib it. I want to say up front that I'm not a medical person, and I'm not a professional in that area. I've done a little bit of digging, and so what I share from you is from that basis. I also want to say tonight that this message will be archived, so in case there's somebody that that didn't get a chance to participate with us, it's in the archives on ChristChurchOnline.com. The first message I preached in Bozeman was April 16th, 1972. Now, the preaching and teaching has gone on consistently by others as well as myself since that time. This is the first time in those 48 years that we faced anything like we're experiencing tonight, except for the camera crew is about the same size as were in attendance in that first assembly in 1972. I think there's myself and 4 other people, so we're actually topping that here tonight. Now, since we've taken steps to close our Christian schools and shutter, so to speak, our buildings because of the coronavirus, I thought it would be good to give an explanation as to why we've taken this, what I would consider to be an extreme measure. First, the virus. Now, according to the information that I have, this particular coronavirus was in animals, but it was able to morph and have the ability to infect humans. And that's different from most influenza viruses because it has no current, the human beings have no current immune resistance. And so it continues to affect even infect even healthy people because there's no ability of the body to instantly produce the correct defense mechanisms. In other words, the body's immune system to respond and kill the virus has been compromised, or it actually hasn't been developed yet. So it tends to continue its march unchecked. Its early symptoms are not necessarily remarkable. It could resemble a cold or an allergy. I think the period of time from the time you're infected until it actually begins to show itself is anywhere from 2 to 14 days. So you may have it and may not know it for a period of time. But it does move fast once it begins to operate, particularly attacking the lungs and the breathing apparatus. Very quickly, it becomes a pneumonia that cannot be treated with antibiotics because it's a viral-based pneumonia, and antibiotics only work against bacteria. So the only way it can be treated then, once the pneumonia is really set in, is through the use of a ventilator in a hospital setting. It's an airborne virus. And so far, there's not been one documented case of someone getting the virus by touching a surface such as a table or a microphone. So while it's helpful to keep your hands sanitized, that does not really solve the problem. Health professionals are very good at hand washing and sanitation, but they themselves are catching this virus because it comes through contact with air breathed by someone who's tested positive. That's why this social distancing is the only earthly thing that will possibly slow down this virus advance and make it possible for the hospitals to be able to help patients who have contracted this disease. Okay. Now, the number of those being infected is currently doubling every 3 days. We can use this Bozeman area, for example, to do some calculations. Say there's 6 people who have tested positive for the COVID-19. Most estimate the actual number of those who have the virus but is yet untested to be 10 times the number of those tested positive. So that puts it at about 60 people in the Bozeman area. In 30 days, that number will be about 6,000. Statistical averages show that about 15% of those who end up being tested positive or who begin to show symptoms, about 15% of those require intensive hospital care. That means 800 people will require hospitalization in a hospital that has 83 beds available. Now, Bozeman's website says that they're ready to help with this coronavirus. Okay. Another example, Benefice Hospital in Great Falls has about 220 beds, but they're still going to have about that same number of 800 patients. The usual flus that make their round don't even begin to put that kind of strain on the medical facilities. And without that hospital help, a lot of these cases will be fatalities. Okay, young people generally are not as impacted by this virus. 80% of other people experience a parallel, if they do get it, to a cold or a headache. Most of the people especially impacted are older people or people whose health is already compromised by some other issue. Not always. This virus seems to be comparable to the Spanish flu outbreak of 1918. I remember my grandmother on my dad's side talking to me about it, and she credited her survival from the 1918 flu epidemic or pandemic to her belief in the Christian Science religion. So a lot of people are going to believe a lot of things here. But this flu is pretty contagious. Example, in 1918, the U.S. population was about 100 million, and they experienced an estimated 675,000 deaths because of the virus. Today's population is 3 times that, with a much higher percentage of older people. So estimates of 200,000 to 1.7 million deaths are not exaggerated figures. So it's for these reasons, then, we've decided to close our school buildings and church buildings to gatherings. The Monday through Friday ministries we've closed because of that. This will assist, in general efforts for social distancing in slowing the spread of the virus and prayerfully, it will prevent many of us from contracting the virus. See, in addition, I personally anticipate that the government will set in motion mandatory lockdowns in a couple of weeks. So in this case, we already have our plans in motion. So make yourself some pie crust, get some grape juice, and prepare to have the Lord's Supper together in your home as a family while watching the broadcast available here at ChristChurchOnline.com. The Bible School broadcasting begins at 8:45 a.m. on Lord's Days, assembly at 10 a.m., and of course the Wednesday nights will be 7 p.m. on Wednesday night, and for the time being, I'll be doing most of the speaking and teaching. How long will it last? I don't think this one will blow over in a couple of weeks. You know, they've given us to 2 weeks, and then they'll check. I don't think this is going to go over that fast. I've kind of looked at some of the charts from the 1918 virus, and it took quite a while for that to die down. First, I thought President Trump was exaggerating when he said July, but that actually may be ballpark. So we have to factor those into our calculations. Another thing that we have to think about is the economic impacts as well. See, as businesses have to shut down, as they have to lay employees off, this begins to impact all kinds of external areas here that are under consideration. And of course, it causes us to begin to increase our prayers, not only for health issues, but also for economic issues as well. If this drags on for a while, we will see a lot of small businesses fail. We could see major shutdowns to area growth. And we're just going to have to trust God and take things one day at a time. So I just wanted to share that with you to give you the reasons why we felt it was necessary. In other words, the only way to slow this down is what they call social distancing. Keep yourself 6 feet from other people. Well, in a school setting or an assembly setting, you're a lot closer than 6 feet. You have a lot more people. And so the percentage, possibility of somebody having the coronavirus and getting in and spreading is much higher. And so for this reason, we've gone along with the voluntary request that we close the assemblies and keep things rolling in this way. I'd like to share some thoughts here on God as a help and God as a hope. In Exodus chapter 2, we see where God begins to work with Moses here in Exodus. Exodus chapter 2 and verse 23 is where we're headed. The situation, of course, is children of Israel are in Egypt. They're under a lot of pressure. They've been enslaved because they're a threat to Israel or to Egypt. Israel is a nation within a nation. So it came about in those days that the king of Egypt died. And the sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage. And they cried out. And their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. So one of the things that God is willing to do is he's willing to help. One of the things that we got to keep in mind when we're taking a look at these scriptures and taking a look at the history connected with it, God helps, but he helps in his own time. Sometimes God is doing things on a scale that's well beyond our comprehension, the scope in which he can operate, and the means by which he works to accomplish his plan. We know that God is step by step bringing the close of his plan to earth to fruition. We know that step by step he's bringing it to the point where one day he's going to say, I've had enough. Jesus himself, during the days of his earthly sojourn, said, I have come to kindle fire, come to cast fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. I just have a picture of Jesus sitting there, and there's a big fuse, going down to the earth, and Jesus has got the torch right next to the fuse. He said, "Can I, Dad? Now, Dad?" ready, Dad? He says, I wish it were already kindled. But he's holding this off. But how much longer, we don't know. And if this is something on a global scale that also causes a global economic crash and could accomplish things that would encourage God to end it, then we have to be prepared for that too. So every Christian should really process these things. Israel, God, it says right here in Exodus 2, God heard their cry for help, but it's going to take a while. Moses is going to have to get called from the land of Midian. The children of Israel are going to have their quota of bricks increased and have to gather the straw. They're going to go through something called the iron furnace. But yet God heard their cry for help. So God is our help. He hears our cries, but he operates on his own plan. Joshua chapter 1. Joshua has taken leadership from Moses, and so God's going to talk to him. Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, cross this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I'm giving to them, to the sons of Israel. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you, just as I spoke to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, as far as the great sea toward the setting of the sun, will be your territory. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do all according to all that is written in it, and then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble, do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So once again, God is offering to help Joshua. He's telling him, be strong, be courageous. Telling the people, be strong, be courageous. I promised I was going to do this. I promised that I was going to help you out. I promised that you are going to take possession of this land. So be strong, be courageous. See, God really is the God of help. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17. Take a look at another one of the Old Testament heroes. Looking at King David himself. This is where David is going to take on Goliath. Of course, you know the story. David had been anointed king earlier. He'd served a little bit of time in the court of King Saul and then got sent home. So, in the meantime, the Philistines arrayed in battle, and the sons of Israel arrayed in battle. And Goliath came forward every day for 40 days, and he roared his challenge, send me a man, send me a man. So, and every time the giant roared, the children of Israel fled. So one day David was sent down by his dad with provisions for his brothers and for the troops, and he saw this happen. He said, what is going on that this uncircumcised Philistine is taunting the armies of Israel? So he began to make some inquiries as to what would happen if somebody were to get rid of this giant threat. And he was informed that his father's house would be tax-free in Israel, that he would be given the king's daughter in marriage, and he'd be placed as a commander in the army, which David thought that all sounded pretty good. So step by step then, things took effect. David went forth to challenge the giant. And in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 45, then David said to the Philistine, see, you got this, well over 10-foot high giant standing there in front of David. And so David's talking to him. David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky, to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. One of the things that we really, as Christians, need to continue to remember is that our trust is in the Lord. It's not in horses, it's not in soldiers, it's not in armies. Our trust is in the Lord. Like it says in Psalm 127, unless the Lord guards the house, the watchman watches in vain. So we have to depend upon the Lord to watch us, to guide us and direct us. Now, in the Old Testament, God promised the children of Israel, he said, none of these diseases will be upon you. But he hasn't made those type of promises in the New Testament. Sometimes Christians have to go through everything that everybody else does. But in the midst of that, see, God continues to make these promises that he is our hope and he is our help, just as he was to David. Psalm 46 and verse 1. Psalm 46. There's a lot of stuff about help in the book of Psalms. Psalm 46:1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in the time of trouble. I love those words, a very present help. He's here. You can't see him, you can't feel him, you can't touch him, but he is present. Now, especially for the Christian, see, these are Old Testament language here, but for the Christian, the indwelling Holy Spirit is actually there. And it's interesting that one of his names is the Helper. So God is a very present help in a time of trouble. Nehemiah chapter 6. It's kind of working our way a little bit through the history of the Old Testament. In other words, we started with Moses in the beginnings of the nation of Israel, and now working toward Nehemiah near the end of the recorded history in the Old Testament of Israel. Nehemiah chapter 6. One of the challenges that Nehemiah found as the governor was the need to get the wall rebuilt. And so he came, and that was a tremendous, tremendous project. He had enemies within, he had enemies without. He had people trying to trap him, people trying to deceive him, people trying to do things like go into the temple where he shouldn't be to escape from his enemies. But Nehemiah was a man of principle. He wouldn't do that. So as things began to kind of wind down there, Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 16, I'll start in verse 15. It says, so the wall was completed on the 25th of the month of Elul in 52 days. They completed the wall in 52 days. That was a huge wall. It says, when all of our enemies heard of it, and all the nations surrounding us saw it, they lost their confidence, for they recognized that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. See, they recognized it was humanly impossible. They recognized that the burden was great, the workers were failing. They recognized without the Lord's strength, they were not going to get the wall built. The enemies recognized that too. And so when the wall was completed, that was a testament to the greatness of God and his ability to help. See, so these things, again, are recorded for our example upon whom the ends of the ages have come, that God is actually able to help. In Acts chapter 26, if we swing over to New Testament writings, Acts chapter 26, this is the Apostle Paul before King Agrippa. Okay. This is a guy who had been beaten with rods 3 times. This is the guy who had been stone. This is a guy who had been 5 times lashed with 39 lashes. This is a guy who was, spent, days and nights in the deep, dangers in the city, dangers in the country, dangers in robbers, dangers among false brethren. This is a guy who had been through shipwrecked. This guy who'd been through all that, and now he's standing before the Roman governor Porcius Festus and King Agrippa, Herod Agrippa II. In Acts chapter 26, this is when Paul says, in verse 22, Acts 26:22, he says, "So, having obtained help from God, I stand to this day testifying both to small and great, stating nothing but what the prophets and Moses said was going to take place, that the Christ was to suffer, and that by reason of his resurrection from the dead, he should be first to proclaim light, both to the Jewish people and to the Gentiles." Paul, even though he'd gone through all of that, he said, the reason I'm standing before you today is because God has helped me. See, when God helps, he doesn't necessarily take away the challenges. What he does when he helps is he makes it possible to go through the challenges victoriously. And that's what God is really working for, is a truly victorious people who love him and who will then continue to shine as lights in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. If you turn to Isaiah chapter 41, here's a prophetic look at the church. Now, the church is the apple of God's eye. It's the bride of Christ. It's as we mentioned, it's the people that he looked to, the generation yet to come that he looked to forever. Okay? So Isaiah chapter 41, in verse 8, he says, "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob whom I've chosen, descendant of Abraham, my friend, you whom I have taken from the ends of the earth." See, that you can tell that's talking about us as the church here. "Whom I have taken from the ends of the earth and called from its remotest parts, and said to you, you are my servant, I have chosen you and not rejected you. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not anxiously look about you, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, surely I will help you, surely I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." These guys on the camera, see, they're keeping me anxiously looking about me. God said, don't do that. He said, I'm with you, okay? "Behold, all those who are angered at you will be shamed and dishonored. Those who continue with you will be as nothing, and you'll perish, they will perish. You will seek those who quarrel with you, but you won't find them. Those who war with you will be as nothing and non-existent. For I am the Lord your God, who upholds your right hand, who says to you, do not fear, I will help you. Do not fear, you worm Jacob," really small, "you men of Israel, I will help you, declares the Lord, and your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel." See, God has really promised to be our help. And why then would he be the one who would help us? Because he has us on a mission. I think of the apostles and Jesus in the boat, and they're crossing the Sea of Galilee, and this humongous storm comes up. And, of course, Jesus is sleeping in the back of the boat. And so they wake him up, and they said, "Lord, don't you care? We're about to drown. We're perishing." And Jesus said, "Why are you timid, you men of little faith?" Well, when you know what the plan of God is, and when you know that the entire plan of God was in that boat, what are the odds that that boat's going to sink? Well, it's not going to. So we need to have that same confidence. We are in the boat. We are the entire plan of God. God is going to help us to do what he really wants us to do. The record of the history of the Old Testament, even the record of things like Paul's statement in the New Testament, indicate that God is going to continue to help his people. As the prophetic statement here is out of Isaiah, I will help you. Do not fear, he said, I will help you. Now, God is not only the God of help, but God is also the God of hope. Now, the record then of God's help is what produces hope in us. See, one of the examples, when Apostle Paul was preaching in Acts 17 to the Areopagus, the crowd there in Athens, he said, look, God is going to judge people. There's coming a day of judgment when God's going to judge people, and he's furnished proof of this by resurrecting them from the dead. So Jesus' resurrection from the dead, which happened historically, which can be documented, then is proof of a yet future event, that is the coming judgment of God. It's a certain thing. So in the same way, the record of God's helping his people throughout the Old and the New Testament provides the hope for us today that he's going to continue to help his people. He's going to help them to carry out their mission, to help them to finish in victory. Psalm 146 is one we want to take a look at there. Psalm 146 in verse 5. Psalm 146, verse 5, said, "Blessed is he whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord his God." See, there he combines both the help and the hope. And of course, again, that's very clearly talking ultimately about us as the church. We are the people that God looked for. All those prophecies, all those foreshadows, all those types, even the promised land of Israel in a physical form was designed to set the stage for a spiritual land, which is what we possess. We who've been called from the east and the west and the north and the south. You know, God says that he calls a bird of prey to accomplish his purpose. He calls for a man to come and do what he wants to get done. See, God is in charge and he's accomplishing these things. He's the God of help and he is the God of hope. If you turn to Hebrews chapter 13, one of the things that we talked about was the possible economic overtones of this situation that we're currently experiencing. In other words, we've already seen the stock market take some fairly drastic dips. We've seen the businesses shut down. We've seen governors order restaurants to close and bars to close. Because, you know, in Montana it's really bad. They ordered the casinos to close. I mean, this is getting rugged out there. And okay, but the question is, what's going to happen to all those jobs? What's going to happen when those people can't afford, you know, to buy things that other people do? I mean, the economic fallout of this thing could be pretty major. Okay, so what about us as Christians? How do we handle this? In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, he said, "Make sure that your character is free from the love of money, being content with what you have. For he himself has said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you. So that we may confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What will man do to me?" See, here, as he's promised and he's a helper, one of the things he says, I will never desert you. I will never forsake you. That has to do with economics and everything else. If you turn to Matthew chapter 6, Lord Jesus himself makes it clear. In the Sermon on the Mount, in verse 24, Matthew 6:24, he said, "No one can serve two masters. He will either hate the one and love the other. He will be devoted to the one, despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth or God and mammon." Mammon was kind of a Syrian god that represented money. So Jesus used that in Matthew chapter 6. He said, you're going to take your choice. Who's going to be your master? Is it going to be mammon, desire for wealth, getting ahead, getting what you want, or is it going to be the Lord who gives you what you need? Okay. He said in verse 25, "For this reason I say to you, do not be worried about your life as to what you will eat or what you will drink, nor for your body as to what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, that they do not sow, nor reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they? And who of you, by being worried, can add a single hour to his life? And why are you worried about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? Do not worry then. I always like the way the unupdated version said, do not be anxious, okay? Do not worry then, saying, what will we eat, or what will we drink, or with what will we clothe ourselves? For the Gentiles eagerly seek these things, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. You know, that's one of the great statements of the Bible. Yeah, each day has enough trouble of its own. One day at a time is all we can take, and one day at a time is all we get, for sure. You know, none of us know, and it's pretty evident that we don't know what tomorrow holds for any of us. You know, the coronavirus is interesting in that sense. You know, you can be going along for some time thinking everything's okay, and all of a sudden it hits. And the problem with it is it hits fast. You know, once it comes on, and it's the real infectious type, then it begins to impact your lungs very quickly. We don't know. See, we can't. That's not something we can worry about. It's outside of any of its control. We can take these preventive measures that we've talked about here, but as far as being able to do much about it beyond that point, we've got no control over that. That's in God's hand. So God is telling us here through Jesus Christ, he said, God clothes the birds, clothes the grass of the field. He feeds the birds. Between Three Forks and Toston, there's wheat. Montana has some big fields of wheat down there. And there must be hundreds of crows in those fields there. When we drive by, we see them just sitting on the fence post out in the fields, just acres black with crows. And God feeds them. Everywhere you go in the world, the birds are getting fed. Well, how could that be? God feeds them. The people that were at the Oregon family camp, they're pretty excited. Katie is always very excited. She's from Oregon. She said, you know what? The daffodils are blooming, okay? And she was so excited when we were there that the daffodils were blooming. The snow at that time in Bozeman was still good 12 inches deep, so we weren't having any daffodils at the time. But God makes them grow. The spring crocus, the fall flowers, he clothes them. How does he do that? Well, he's capable is the point. I think of the children of Israel in the wilderness for 40 years. 603,550 numbered men, plus priests and Levites, plus their families, plus their livestock. Okay, going through the wilderness. How are you going to feed that many people? God did. One of the messages is that from his perspective, says, look, if I fed that many people, I can feed you. I can feed your little bunch. So your job is to put the kingdom of God first. Now, some of these things are starting to put some of us to test a little bit, because maybe we've been playing with Christianity a little bit. Maybe we've been kind of off and on our church attendance, off and on our commitment, off and on in our Bible reading, off and on in our prayer, a lot of different things. This is God's wake-up call that you better put first things first, because a lot of the things that people spend their time fooling around with and prevents them from getting their Bible reading done or prevents them from getting their prayer time done, a lot of those things that people fool around with, they're going to be taken away if this continues. Then you figure out what's important. Now, it would have been better to figure out what was important before this wake-up call was necessary, but Jesus is telling us here, look, you put the kingdom first. You make spiritual commitments. You think of the church first. Then he said, I'll add these things to you. Now, what if a person just pretends to do that? Well, Jesus knows that. Jesus knows if somebody's pretending. He knows if somebody's being honest and upfront. He knows if somebody's playing games. And so his promise is to those who are honest and sincere and truly putting the kingdom of God first. See, God is the God of hope, but he is the God of hope on his terms. We don't just get to say, oh, yeah, I hope God does this, and I'm sure he will. God doesn't operate like that. He operates based on what his word says and in accordance with the examples that are written in his word. Turn to 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 17. He says, if you address as Father the one who impartially judges according to each one's work, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your stay on earth, knowing that you are not redeemed with perishable things like silver or gold from your futile way of life inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood, as of a lamb unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. For he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but it has appeared in these last times for the sake of you, who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. One of the things that the Apostle Peter is making clear is that the entire gospel of Christ is designed to bring us to faith and to bring us to a recognition of hope. That was necessary. Mankind walks with his head down. Man is from the earth. He's made of the dust of the ground. And his first basic instinct is survival. So that's why his head is looking down. He's interested in planting and harvesting. He's interested in building. He's interested in marrying, being given in marriage. He's interested in buying and selling as the economy increases. But his head's down. He's not looking up at all. So God has to reach into mankind and get their head looking up. I always picture there's a hook right underneath the jaw, right here. Look it up, look it up. Sometimes when you're trying to talk to a younger child, maybe they've had a scoring violation. Maybe they're trying to cover up something they didn't exactly tell the truth about, and you're trying to get them to look at you. See, and that's one of their problems. They want to look down. Well, that's how mankind as a whole is. It goes back to Adam. When Adam and Eve knew that they'd sinned, they went and hid themselves in the garden. See, mankind has been hiding from God ever since. And ever since that time, God's been going through the garden of this earth, calling out, Adam, where are you? What he uses then to get man looking up is sin, and particularly the guilty conscience that goes with sin. Now, everybody is conscious of that. One of my favorite examples is every year in India they have what's called the Kumbh Mela. It's a big festival, occurs about, did I say every year? Occurs about every 12 years. And 30 million people in India show up for this festival along the banks of the Ganges River. Now, at some point, for some reason, the crowd breaks loose. If you ever notice, crowds can be manipulated, crowds can be stirred to hysteria, and all of a sudden they just start running. That's one reason that God compares people to sheep. If one goes, they all tend to go. So the crowd breaks loose and heads for the Ganges River. When they get down to the Ganges River, they try to wash their sins off in the Ganges River with soap and water or something like that, okay? People in Ecuador, for example, one of the customs that some of them have down there is that on New Year, they make sort of an effigy of themselves and they burn it. So to get rid of the guilt and the things that they've accumulated in the last year. See, man's got all kinds of these means by which he's trying to get out from underneath the guilt. False religion does that. Tries to give people the sense that maybe their sins are wiped away. Christianity or fake Christianity tends to focus on a Jesus that they preach who offers forgiveness of sins, but they twist the means by which the real Jesus can forgive those sins. So they think they're supposed to have forgiveness of sins. They still have a guilty conscience. Mankind deals in drugs. Mankind gets into alcohol. Mankind gets into gambling. Mankind gets into all kinds of things to shut down the noise that's in their head from that guilty conscience. That guilty conscience is pain that's put there by the purpose of God to get man to look up. Gary DePaulo is running one of the cameras tonight, and if I tried to say, "Hey, Gary, how about if I take some of your guilt for you?" Well, you immediately recognize there's no other human being that can do anything about your issues. You're the only one that can do anything for your issues, okay? You. See, so, but you can't do anything either because you still got the guilty conscience. So God sends Jesus into the world then to take care of that guilty conscience. See, now man is looking up. But you have in the Old Testament, you have hundreds of prophecies, you have foreshadows, you have types, you have the law, you have the provisions of the law to enable and to force a person, in one manner of speaking, to start looking to the eventual coming of Jesus for answers. The Bible says that in all those Old Testament sacrifices, the blood of the goats and the bulls and the rams and the guilt offerings, the sin offerings, the peace offerings, the grain offerings, the wave offerings, the heave offerings, it says in those sacrifices there's a reminder of sins year by year. The purpose of those sins was to make those people conscious of their need for a Savior, so that when Jesus came into the world, they would begin to recognize who he was. Some of the first words of John the Immerser to the apostles, early apostles of Jesus, Andrew and John, were, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." See, conscious of sin, conscious of a need then for someone to take away those sins. When Joseph found out that Mary was pregnant and was debating what to do about it, an angel appeared to him. He said, "Joseph, son of Mary, do not be afraid to take Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, because it is he who will save his people from their sins." See, it's not save their people in their sins, but to save them from their sins. So God had a plan through Jesus Christ to begin to free man from sin, to give him a clean conscience, enable him to begin to live a new life. See, that's why Peter says that God raised Jesus from the dead and gave him glory. Not only was Jesus crucified, not only did Jesus die on the cross, not only was Jesus poured out for the forgiveness of sins, but he actually rose from the dead, appeared to the witnesses over 40 days to establish the truthfulness that the same one crucified was the same one raised from the dead. And then on the 40th day, he ascended to glory as the great high priest. Jesus could not be priest on earth. The only place he could be priest was in heaven. So when Jesus ascended, the first thing he did was he purified heaven. The Bible says, having made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. So Jesus then, raised from the dead, was given glory, so that he might then be the high priest, the intercessory for the sins of mankind. So Peter, when he's talking about it, is pointing out that the whole message of the gospel, the whole picture, has to be painted. Now, when that whole picture is painted, what that does then, it gives a person forgiveness of sins, gives them the presence of God, the indwelling Holy Spirit, and it gives them hope. And that's what God is really working on here. Now, what God does is he takes us back to basics a lot of times in order to remind us. See, the Lord's Supper, for example, that I encourage you to participate in this coming Lord's Day and every coming Lord's Day, regardless of where you're at, to take that with Jesus and take that with the body of Christ as a whole. But the Lord's Supper is a reminder of what Jesus said. See, is he prepared to share in the Lord's Supper with the apostles? He said, "Of the loaf, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And the cup, he said, "This is my blood of the covenant," see, or the new covenant, which is poured out for many for forgiveness of sins. See, he's a reminder of what Jesus did. Lord's Supper is not only a reminder of what Jesus did on the cross, but it's a reminder that he rose again. Now, the Lord's Supper is celebrated on the first day of the week. And the reason it's celebrated on the first day of the week is because that's the day that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, Jesus himself, as near as I can tell, participated in the institution of the Lord's Supper on Wednesday night. Okay, but that's not when the church was to participate in the Lord's Supper. When the Apostle Paul speaks of that in 1 Corinthians 11, he said, "I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you." So the instructions that Paul had as to when the Lord's Supper was to be celebrated was given by the Lord himself to Paul. And you can tell from 1 Corinthians chapter 11, things in there, coupled with 1 Corinthians 16, that the Lord's Supper was taken on the first day of the week. You can tell from Acts chapter 20 and verse 7, coming into Troas, a congregation that Paul started, that they participated on the first day of the week. They gathered together on the first day of the week, week 4, literally the breaking of the loaf, the breaking of bread. So that's the reason that the church assembled, and that was a command by Jesus to the apostles. Why the first day of the week? That's the day Jesus rose from the dead. So in the Lord's Supper, there's not only a remembrance of his death, there's also a remembrance of his resurrection from the dead. But, and that's not it in fullness either. Because if we are here, about our table, wherever that is, and participating in the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week, then that would have no effect had not Jesus been positioned as our high priest. See, his blood had to be sprinkled into heaven in order for the Lord's Supper to have any effectiveness at all. So the Lord's Supper is not only a remembrance of his death, his burial, and his resurrection, but it's also a remembrance of his ascension to glory. Now, one other thing, Jesus is coming again. That's also built into the remembrance of the Lord's Supper. Paul, when he talked about that in 1 Corinthians 11, he said, by this we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. See, it's built in there that until he comes, he's coming again. And so that's also part of the remembrance of the Lord's Supper. So it's pretty exciting to think that when Peter was said, God raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. God wants us to have hope in him. The ultimate hope, then, of the Christian is his resurrection from the dead. If you turn to Romans chapter 8, the Apostle Paul talks about that. He's talking about how the whole creation is groaning and suffering the pains of childbirth together until now. Verse 23, Romans 8:23, he says, not only this, but also we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. The redemption of our body is an expression for our resurrection from the dead. For in hope we've been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he already sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, with perseverance we wait eagerly for it. Hope from a Bible perspective is not it could happen one way or another. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. That's not biblical hope. Like I hope I get a raise next week, or, I hope the train's on time, or, hope the plane isn't canceled. That may or may not be. But biblical hope is a certain thing. You just don't know when it's going to happen. So we have then as our hope of our resurrection from the dead. For us, it's a sure thing. We just don't know when that's going to happen. So in hope, we've been saved. See, in other words, the God of hope raised Jesus from the dead and gave him glory so that we have faith and so that we have hope. We face the type of challenges that we're facing today. We really need to have hope in God. Well, there's a possibility that some among us will contract this virus, and there's a possibility that some among us will be fatal. As I mentioned, we don't have any New Testament guarantee. Look a little bit further here in Romans chapter 8. He asked a series of questions here, starting in verse 31. He says, what then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who's against us? He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how will he not also with him freely give us all things? Who will bring a charge against God's elect? God's the one who justifies. Who's the one who condemns? Christ Jesus is he who died, yes, rather, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who also intercedes for us. Who will separate us from the love of Christ? This is the thing that the Christian's got to get in his mind. Who will separate us from the love of Christ? If these things are happening to me, is it because I've been a bad boy? Is it because I've been a bad girl? No. Will tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword, just as written, for your sake we are being put to death all day long. We were considered as sheep to be slaughtered. See, God's going to use us as Christians. He's operating a strategic plan. And the Bible's pretty clear that he places each one of us in the body just as he desired. And so he's never guaranteed us that we're not going to suffer through some of the same things as our worldly contemporaries are suffering. Actually, he needs us right in the middle of them. He needs us suffering the same things as them, because we're going to be the bridge that some of these lost souls have to God, and that's the only way that God can position us to be in the right place at the right time. So a Christian has to understand that he's being used strategically by God, and recognize that what he's going through is not an indication of God's wrath or judgment if it's some of the things that we've been talking about. I mean, tribulation, the tremendous things that, say, the Apostle Paul or first century Christians underwent, the distress, the persecutions. How about the famine? There are Christians that went through famine, and God allowed them to go through that because he had a bigger strategic plan, or nakedness or peril or even sword. Paul says in verse 37, it says, all these things we overwhelmingly conquer through him who loved us. We're more than conquerors. One year for the Spanish Peaks, we had as our theme the March of the Hooper Nicolman. Okay, and the word overwhelming, conqueror, more than conqueror here is the Greek word Hooper Nicolman. Now the Greek word for victory is Nike. So the Nicolman in the middle of that is victory. Hooper is sometimes brought into English as hyper. So really what it is over-the-top conquerors that God has made us to be in all these things. So God really wants us to understand. He says, I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. A Christian knows that God loves him, not based on his external circumstances. A Christian knows that God loves him based on what the Bible says. The Bible pretty clearly says that God demonstrates his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We as Christians really need to take these things to heart. They're more than just pretty platitudes. They are things, these are the words of God that go deep into the soul. And they're the words that are there when you need them. They're the power that God has to enable us to keep moving forward with perseverance, to hope for our resurrection from the dead. This is where God is really at in this whole process, is getting us to trust him. Any circumstances that you and I might experience on a personal basis are tailor-made by God to help us to develop the character of Christ within us. Closing, I'd like to look at Romans chapter 15 and verse 13. One of them, to me, one of the most awesome verses of the Bible. I was doing some speaking back in Virginia, Maryland, that area, and I finished up flying in and out of Baltimore, out of Baltimore Washington International Airport, BWI. And so I was there very early in the morning to return my rental car. So I was actually the first guy at the rental car place. And there's a black guy there, really nice guy, and he was opening up the rental car. And he said, how are you doing today? And I said, I am doing awesome. I said, how about you? He said, good. He said, what have you been doing? I said, well, I've been doing some preaching. He says, well, give me a scripture, brother. Give me a scripture. See, so I gave him Romans chapter 15, 13. Now may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. That's where God's going. He said, that's good, brother. That's good. He said, so what verse was that? I said, that was Romans 15, 13. He says, I will memorize that. So I'm glad you joined us tonight. We have a lot of reasons for excitement. God is actually continuing to work his strategy and his program, and we get to be a part of that.